Just a note that this podcast may touch on difficult themes and include some challenging conversations, so please take care when listening. This is The Widow Diaries, a podcast that holds space for the often unspoken stories of grief, love, and life after loss as a young widow. I'm Caroline Winter, and like so many, I've been on this journey. So come with me each episode and hear from others who've also walked the winding path of widowhood in their own way. The Widow Diaries, for First Light Widowed support, where no story is the same and every story matters. I've been a journalist for many years, and for a lot of those years I chased news stories. Deadlines, headlines, the next update. When something tragic happened, the focus was what's happened to who, when and why. But after Richard died, something shifted in me. Now, when I hear about a tragedy in the news, my mind goes straight to the people left behind, because behind every headline is a family learning how to live without someone they love. Today's episode is about one of those families. Lee Lovell's wife, Emma, was murdered during a home invasion. But at its very core, this is not just a story about crime or justice. It's the story of a man who lost his wife, a father who's raising his children without their mum, and a widower who's grieving while also navigating a legal system that keeps the loss in the public eye. So what does that kind of grief look like? How does it change you? And what does it mean to keep going when your life becomes a headline? Lee, thank you for being here.
Okay, no worries. Thank you for having me.
Now, before we talk about loss, which is unfortunately what this podcast is about, I'd really love to start with Emma. What was she like as a person, and what did you love most about her?
I suppose we had a few years before the children came along of us just doing like our thing of, going to different countries and, weekends away and living life and starting a home. But then after a few years, like most people, we got married and we ended up having two beautiful children, two girls. And I just think she was always just born to be a mum. That was just her thing in life. She was just devoted to the girls and, I always remember her when we had our first child, like we never fed them really like that bottled food or jarred food. Like she would just like make everything from scratch and, like different foods and blending things up and the kids always ate so well. And yeah, just a devoted mum really. And just to us as a family and to a relationship and always had each other's backs. And she was such a hard worker as well. And, she, for a while there was done like an extra course to become like an accountant. So I think she got like an accountant's assistant, that type of thing. And, it always like kept her employed and yeah, just a hardworking person, was good to people and friends around her. But, she one of these people also that like didn't really have the time of day for people if you disrespected her in some ways or messed her around, if that makes sense, like she was very like guarded in that way. And then, she would just leave you behind, if that makes sense. So, that was maybe like a good quality to have at times, that, so yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. You mentioned that you did some travelling before the kids came along, and I can detect an accent in there. How did you both meet?
So both of us come from the UK, and one of my friends I used to go to school with, I hadn't seen for a while. One evening, his partner at the time, she phoned me, and I knew her as well from when we used to hang out weekends or whatever. And she phoned me and says, my friend had been attacked one evening walking home from the night out, and, did want to sort of come around, sort of say hello and, catch up a bit, so I did. And then, towards the end of the evening, I was like, you got any single friends? And she was like, my friend Emma is actually single. So why don't you come back on Wednesday? Because this was a Monday night. And then I'll introduce you to her. So I think she was already there. And I turned up after work and yeah, we sort of introduced and sort of hit it off, I suppose. And then I think it was that Friday we went out as like a foursome, went roller skating, and
Oh, how cool.
yeah. But then I just remember my friend saying, "Oh, you got to make a move on her," and I was like, "Just stop pressurizing me, like." But yeah, we sort of went out a few more times and hung out, and it sort of went from there, really. So yeah.
There was obviously some time from when that moment happened to you finding yourselves in Queensland in Australia. What made you settle in Australia?
So back in 2002, we both came over here, sort of travelling. And I remember it was one of those sort of conversations really where it was like start of the year and I'm like, oh, do you want to go traveling? And we gave ourselves like the rest of the year to save up. And then, so January 2002, we headed to Singapore, had a couple of days there and then flew on to Australia, and we were in the country just under 6 months, I think. And then flew home via sort of Thailand and Singapore again and came home. And then back in like early 2008, we'd had both kids by that point, and we'd actually used to watch this program on the BBC called like Wanted Down Under, and it was about these families who used to go over to Australia for like a week, and they would sample like lifestyle and jobs and houses and all that sort of stuff, and then after a week, that as a family, they would vote on where they wanted to live. And, back 2008, like, property was so much cheaper than what it is compared to now. But like, she phoned me up and said, oh, do you want to go to Australia? Because we can get visas and because your trade is on the demand list. So I was like, yeah, sure, let's go for it. And even then she was like, well, even if we say get the visas within a year, you've got up to like 5 years to enter the country. And that sort of seemed okay to us, but then the whole like GFC happened in 2008, and then we didn't get our visas till 2011. We used to go on this website called Poms in Oz, and I'd saw it on there through some of the group chats that, my trade as being like a fitter, mechanic or whatever you say, was back on the demand list. So we got in contact with the visa people who were using, and they were like, yeah, we know, like, I think by next month or something, you need to get yourself medicals done. And so we went to Birmingham and got our medicals done, and then like the next day it was pretty much your visa's granted. I was like, oh wow. So I'd already sort of I discovered Seek, the website, when I was back in the UK. So I was just looking on there, and I suppose we would have liked to have gone to like Sydney, but just thought it would be like too expensive. So we both liked Brisbane when we were traveling. So it was like, oh, let's just try Brisbane. And then Emma stumbled across North Lakes that people were talking about. There's a lot of British people coming here. And so I applied for a job in Brisbane for a demolition company, and said, look, I've got my visa, and, the house is up for sale, and yeah, I'm applying for the job basically. So randomly they actually contacted me back and said, okay, well, let's set up a meeting via Skype. And we had a chat on Skype, and it was like, oh, okay, well, I'll give you the job. And I think that was only because I really had like my PR visa. It wasn't this, we were going for like a 457, a temporary visa. And so he was like, oh, come over in front of your wife and kids. I'll put you up in my house and I'll give you a car to use. And so yeah, done the journey by myself, and had 3 weeks without Emma and the girls. And then Emma was like, I'm not coming over till you found somewhere for us to live. So, I wouldn't say, it wasn't really during the week, but like weekends, I was spending a lot of time driving around like North Lakes and trying to find a place and then see what was available, and yeah, put an offer in. And as soon as I got it approved, then she booked like tickets straight away, and she came over like that next weekend or such. So yeah, and that's how we ended up in like North Lakes, really. So yeah.
And that was home, obviously. Did you enjoy, bringing the girls up there and living the lifestyle that that area has to offer?
There's two things to this. Like for the girls and I and Emma, like I still think it's an amazing place, North Lakes. I still think Australia is an amazing place, really. Like it's, we had got good weather. We had like this, nice, reasonably newish sort of 4-bedroom house, and Emma was at home with the kids, and there's plenty of parks around, like there is in most places, all that sort of stuff, But personally, for me, like I don't know, I sort of I thought I was this like real confident person, and would find moving to Australia just a bit of a breeze, but like it knocked me so bad. Like
Did
my
it really?
confidence just generally, and then the company I was working for at the time, my supervisor at the time was not a great person, and that just destroyed my confidence even further. And I was just like every day looking for a different job. And then back then, like mining was a lot more prevalent to what it is now. And but they were like most of the time it was mining jobs, or there was jobs on the south side. And I don't want to be traveling like an hour plus, to work every day. And so then just that pressure, I suppose, is like a man to provide for your wife and kids, and was just like immense. And it was just did not do my mental health like any good whatsoever, to be honest. So yeah, that was a pretty low point for myself, to be honest. Yeah.
And so what kept you going and kept things together? Was it having the family there and just working on building a life in North Lakes in Queensland?
I think part of it for me personally was just not wanting to fail, because it would have been so easy just to like pack up our belongings and move back after, say, 6 months or whatever and say, well, we tried it. But I think in my mind, I always wanted to give it like a minimum of 2 years, and, to try and feel like we'd settled in. But then ultimately wanted to try and stick it out until we'd got citizenship. But then things did get easier, life, you get on with life a bit, like work settled down for me, and home life did, and that sort of stuff. You get more familiar with your surroundings and people, and just, Australians, I suppose, because it's different, like traveling here when, this is going to sound weird, but traveling is not reality.
No.
You can get up when you want and you're young and go out drinking and do whatever. But then like living here is a different kettle of fish than having to work and pay taxes and, thing is, my old job back in the UK was like shift work, and it was such a cushy job. I used to work like 4 days on, 4 days off. It was like 12-hour shifts. But Emma used to go and sort of, on the days that I was sometimes at home, she would go and work with her brother, because they own a jewelry business that's doing like immensely well at the moment. And so she would sometimes go and work for them and do accounts or whatever, and I would stay at home and look after the kids. And we actually had like a really nice life in the UK, but then, like I said, you come here and just sort of understanding Australian culture and just all that sort of stuff, but then after a while it did get easier, and, we'd moved house and made some friends and all that sort of stuff, and so yeah.
Yeah, that adjustment, it's huge, absolutely huge.
Yeah.
We're going to talk a bit more about a terrible night, Boxing Day of 2022 in a moment, but can you just paint a picture for us of your life together before that night? So what did family life look like in your home?
Emma and I had actually gone through like a rough patch, to be honest. We moved to like Sydney for a while. Things weren't always that great, but moving back to Brisbane seemed to like save our relationship, and over time we'd just been getting on better and better. We were like in this happy place, and Emma's mum had been over the October to the December, I think, and even she made a comment about us looking like newlyweds, just that joyful, happy couple that we were, and just like maybe like being at peace, and just our family was growing. We had like, kids were 13 and 15 and like well behaved and respectful kids, and so home life was a happy place and was just getting better and better. Like, yeah, just a real happy place to be, really. And I just want to say, like a few years ago, like I remember there was one winter when, we hadn't really done much for a while. I was like, okay, well, let's find some stuff to do. So I went on Google Maps and was finding like, found all these different markets to go around, found different cafes to go around, different beaches, and just a little bit more off the beaten track. And we're just trying to do things at like weekends and take the kids out. And it was we were all about our family, that's where we were at, like giving them a good life and that sort of stuff. And that's why I say, like, it was just a happy time for us, really. Yeah.
That's lovely to hear that. If it's okay, I'd like to go to that night, Boxing Day night of 2022. Emma was fatally stabbed during a home invasion. It's been talked about so much in the media and, of course, in the courts. But from your perspective, Lee, what do you want people to understand about how your and your girls' lives changed that night?
You know what? It's, I suppose I've said this before, and I've heard this, that where people say, oh, where they've lost a loved one, and they're like, oh, we're now the ones left with that life sentence. And I don't think I understood the gravity of that when I'd heard other families say that in the past. But then when you're part of that, then yeah, that hits home that like we are the ones left with that sentence, because it's not just. There comes a point, and I suppose a lot of widowers will get that, you just sort of get on with your life to a certain extent. But there's always those times when, like school graduation was difficult, I suppose, seeing my eldest daughter graduate. And I think it would have been such an awesome time for Emma, knowing that all the hard work she'd put into like Scarlett with helping with homework and getting her tutoring had culminated in her like graduating. Would have been such a happy time for her. And even like my youngest daughter, like she does dancing inside of school and outside, and just even now, like when she's dancing for school and she's got these Eisteddfods on, I go to like pretty much like, not all of them, but pretty much like every one as much as I can get to, and it's still beautiful to watch her like every time. And like even now sometimes you think like, oh, Emma would love to see this, and just to see her daughter dancing. But then you think about all the times ahead of you, that like weddings and grandchildren and starting their first job, and just all those days that don't always seem that significant, but to a widowed person is a huge loss and a huge day, I suppose. So, yeah.
Yeah, it's true. Suddenly those things become bigger than you could have ever imagined. In the days and the weeks that followed that night, what for you was the hardest part of those early moments of grief?
Like a lot of it, it's just a bit of a blur, to be honest. It was just so much going on, like just getting my head around, I suppose, finances and sorting things out, and death certificates, and talking to banks, and being hounded by St. George about like paying some credit card off I knew nothing about and had nothing to do with, and that sort of stuff. But then also just feeling this immense protectiveness over the girls as well.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's going to sound funny, but like Emma dealt with the kids a lot. She was more at home, sometimes worked from home, dealt with the kids a lot more because they were all girls. You know what I'm saying? They always went to her for like advice or whatever, talk to her, and not to me as much. So then afterwards, it was like you just felt like you just want to put your arms around them and protect them from the world. And I remember like back in 22 or whatever, that youth crime was on the rise, I suppose you could say. And I remember like watching 9 News and seeing these like youths like stealing cars and crashing into people. And I sort of remember thinking about Emma, because she used to drive down to like Indooroopilly, and thinking like, I can understand that, I don't want to sound morbid, but like her being in a car accident like that, maybe losing her life that way, someone running into her, that to me is feasible. But then to have someone break into your house on Boxing Day evening and her be stabbed in the chest is so far out of the realm of me possibly thinking that would ever happen to her. Sometimes you think like, it just can't be real. No. One of these days you're going to wake up from this dream and it's all just going to be like a weird dream, because like that just can't happen. Like I shouldn't have, to a certain extent, I shouldn't have to lock my front door, Should we live in the world where people are that fearful they have to lock their doors every night? Nah, in some ways I shouldn't have to do that. Shouldn't have to worry about that. I shouldn't expect people who are not invited to come into my house and do that sort of thing, like, I don't know. That was just such a horrific time. Like I didn't know this at the time, and it was only because I was watching a TV program. It really dawned on me, but that I got taken to hospital before Emma, and they were like, oh, she'll be following you behind, and because I was then being treated at the time, and everyone had sort of left the room, and I was then just sitting with this like wonderful nurse that was chatting to me or whatever, and I'm guessing she didn't know what happened either, but. Then like this male nurse dressed in all black came through and told me that, they'd done everything they tried, but Emma hadn't survived, and when I was told that like Emma had died, like my understanding was that like she had arrived to hospital and she was still partly alive. And my understanding was that her heart, they'd actually like stitched her up. They saved her in that regard, but her heart was just that weak from the trauma that she just didn't survive, and it was petering out. But if she was alive and I was in the other room, why could I not go and see her? I knew she couldn't talk to me, and I knew that she wouldn't be able to respond, but I would just have, I just wanted to be there for her last breath. And I wasn't given that chance. And they were like, because of the, I suppose, the seriousness of the operation they'd done on her, from my understanding, is they pretty much cut her from armpit to armpit and had to perform this open heart surgery. And she was not in a good way. And I get that, and I'm sure it would have not been a good state. But I just wanted to see her. And even if she'd have like taken her last breath with me, I just wanted that,
Yeah, absolutely.
I just wasn't given the chance to have that. So,
can I ask you, did the girls wake? Were they aware of what was going on?
my eldest daughter that evening had come back from her boyfriend's house, and she was just like asleep in the bed, and she only heard, the screams from Emma. But Cassie was, I don't know, after like Emma and I had gone to bed, she was still up on her iPad watching Netflix, so she heard the commotion and come down and saw a lot of the fighting and that sort of stuff. And,
oh gosh.
Scarlett didn't, but like I said, she heard the screams, and then
Goodness.
so for Cassie it was maybe that's why she hasn't wanted to talk about it, for seeing what was happening in it, and I don't think she necessarily saw the stabbing, because I think that was as we were all sort of just bundling out the door, it happened as such, but that they were awake and saw Emma like laying on the floor and being treated by paramedics, and because at the time I'd phoned one of my friends, but he didn't pick up. So I phoned another friend round the corner who only lives like 2 doors away. So like he thought that maybe like his son had been sort of, driving and smashed into our tree out the front, and come out of his house and just see like, all these blue lights, and was like, oh God, something serious. And then come running up the road to like Emma just being treated as well. And so, yeah, but the girls didn't know that like Emma had passed until early hours of the morning when I got back to them, because my friend had turned up, and him and his wife had taken the kids back to their house, and it was quite lucky really that like Emma had put like a screen lock on the girls' phones, so they didn't have access to their phones from say 10 p.m. to 6 a.m., that type of time. And so they had no access to like social media, because it was all over before that time. And I'm sure that they would have seen something, because it was on the news. But like enough, like I got back to my friend's house, because I thought that he had told them that Emma was dead before I had the chance. And I said to him, like, have you told him? And he was like, no. He was like, I never would. And so then, I had to go into their house, and Scarlett was like, where's Mummy? And I'm like, we need to talk. She didn't make it. But then, and I know like I'm picking on the police in this regard, but like the lady police officer just dropped me off, and it like went, and I'm like, I just wanted someone to like sit with me, like hold my hand or do something, and just help me tell the kids, but I was just left to do that by myself.
Oh my gosh, that the trauma from all of that, it would be unimaginable. Unimaginable.
And then like the kids are both crying, and like I'm not really, and again that's where like it sets in, and you're like, why am I not crying for? Like this is like such a horrific like thing that's happened to my family, and I'm not even showing any emotion in it, but then I think you just realise that your body's still pumping with adrenaline, and
the shock is
shock
is so overwhelming. And also there's an element there where you are, I'm their father, I need to take control, I need to be calm, those sorts of things that are going on as well. How did you try and hold your family together when you were grieving yourself, and how did you manage that with what the girls were going through?
I think a lot of it, I just put my own needs to one side, and only recently feel that like I've stopped doing that to a certain extent. Like, so you just had to focus on the kids, I suppose, and making sure they were getting counselling and they were sort of doing okay. And then, yeah, I think even for like probably a good couple of years or more, like I was just in shock and just I found grieving just so hard, and also it's just my perception of grief as well has really like hindered my grief process, I think, because I suppose my understanding of grief is what you see, like I'll say on TV or movies, and a lot of that is of I'll say predominantly like women, crying uncontrollably or sobbing in bed and can't get out of bed because they're just finding the day too challenging. I'm not trying to sound disrespectful for that, but that's just my interpretation of it. But that just didn't happen for me. And then you go through that whole thing of like, well, what's wrong with me? Like, why am I not getting upset? Like, why am I not crying more? And then you just think, well, is that a level of reflection of love towards Emma, that like if I loved her more, that like I would feel more upset, so yeah, trying to deal with that as well in your own grieving journey has been pretty challenging, really. So
yeah, that really resonates with me. I was very similar. I didn't cry hard. It took ages before it happened, and I thought exactly the same thing. I thought, what does this mean? Does this mean that that I didn't love him? Does this mean that I'm a bad person? What does it mean? I think in that moment as well, or those moments, and grief does do strange things to you, but you start questioning almost everything, don't you?
Yeah. And even like, I think it was yesterday I was watching a program on Paramount, this like fire thing, and it was a dad there lost his daughter in an accident, and then they portrayed him again just like this, screaming, crying, uncontrollable, and sort of anger and that sort of stuff. And I'm like, that's not life. And I wish they wouldn't do that. Like, and I suppose I'm just basing it on my own scenario, but it's like, I would much rather see like a man, like not even necessarily like crying, but maybe a bit of a tear and contemplating or just being quiet, or that sort of stuff, rather than this like almost like unrealistic, like shouting, crying, that type of thing, flailing their arms around, because for me that's just not how it went, and it's just as you said, it just makes you feel so guilty about the love you have for someone and question your relationship or whatever.
That's right, almost like you're doing it wrong. You're not doing it right.
Correct, 100%. Yeah.
Lee, most people grieve privately insofar as you don't have all eyes on you, but your grief has unfolded in a very, very public way, and it's really hard to possibly understand what that must be like. But you mentioned before that you felt that you put your grief aside, which many parents do in these circumstances. But how do you think having that very public eye on you has affected your ability to process the loss, the grief, the life that you have now?
I think people want to see you like upset, and there's been a few times when I've done interviews outside of court, and I think they're almost hoping I'll say for that, like almost like that money shot of someone crying, of like, oh, yeah, we've got it, he's that like sobbing husband. But it's just been different. I don't want to be like sobbing in front of the cameras. That's the last thing I want, that I have like, remember like one time I sort of walked away, turning away when things got a bit heavy, that, I'm not going to be crying in front of TV to people, so, but yeah, I don't know, maybe they just expect a certain level of it. And I know that also like a lot of people I've spoken to just expected a level of anger to come from me as well. And why did I not show more anger, towards the defendant as such, and people are like, I don't know how you do it, I would have been up there in court and I would have been saying this and saying that and doing that. And I suppose like I'm just not necessarily like an angry person, so that's not me. But yeah, I don't know, like I just, very early on actually, like one of my friends who helped us immensely really was like, it's all well and good to have a go at the government, but just be aware that like if you want their, say, like ongoing support, then just maybe be mindful of what you say and how you say it. I'm like, actually, that's probably a good point. So, and then I felt I had to be very careful about not doing interviews and to say something and, then hurt any potential trial that would have happened. And, because you did get hit up very early on about the people doing interviews and you wanted to speak and say things, but again, you just felt like you couldn't really do that because of, what happens if I said this? And then, it gets called out in a trial and it's not a fair trial for our defendant and all that sort of stuff. So, yeah.
It's so interesting hearing it from your perspective as a journalist who for many, many years has covered various cases, not unlike yours, sadly, but knowing that on the other side is actually a person who is going through all sorts of things that you can't possibly imagine. And now I do have some insight, having been widowed, but that realisation that you are trying to not only grieve the loss of this person who you love, the mother of your children, plus deal with this horrendous act that has happened and violated your family, but on top of that then be strategic in how and what you say, when really in that moment you just want to say whatever you want to whoever you want. And you weren't able really to be able to do that for a bunch of reasons, as you've outlined.
Yeah, and I suppose also then, because it did get very political, the whole Voice for Victims movement started up, and I'm not really a political person, but then you start hearing about all these law changes that happened back in 2017 or something, because from my understanding is if they hadn't been changed, then Emma's murderer was 17. Under the old laws he would have been up for a life sentence, but they changed that from that point, the cut-off point, from 18 years to 17, so he didn't fall into that anymore. And I just want someone to say, look, okay, Lee, we'll just change the laws back and, whatever. But it just seemed that like the government at the time was so reluctant to do anything and to even to acknowledge that okay, that, the course we've been on for the past few years hasn't been the right one. And we're sorry for that. That's all you really wanted them to say, and just that acknowledgement. But, they just didn't do that. And I suppose I get why they didn't, but you just wanted someone to say that, we are at fault for this, because of what we've done. And so, yeah.
You've been plunged into a world that you, I'm guessing, had really nothing to do with prior. So with, police, government policy, the legal system, and trying to learn about that and apply it in your case. What's that been like for you?
Well, a couple of years ago or more, I think before even the court system started for us, I had not just me, but through the QHVSG, that's the Queensland Homicide Victim Support Group, they had Todd Fuller, he is the director of the DPP, come and do a talk about, I suppose, the justice system and courts and all that sort of stuff. And it was pretty awful, really, because after he left, you just think, this system is just set up to keep people out of prison. That's all it is, the whole, having enough evidence or, reasonable doubt, and, it just, everything is almost in the defendant's favour. And then as we went through it, when the first guy, even though he pled guilty, was able to appeal his sentence, and I'm like, that's not fair. If he is allowed to appeal, why am I not? And then, but for the DPP, they saw that the 14 years that we got as a win, because it was a heinous crime. It was more than 10 years. So it was well, the judge has done nothing wrong. We've done nothing wrong. So, ultimately we're not going to say to the Attorney General that, we think we should be appealing this. And I suppose like most people, you just think that's so unfair. How is a defendant allowed to appeal and we're not, it should be both or none or whatever. So that was a pretty hard thing to hear. And then, when old mate got 14 years, because this whole thing about precedent, what's happened in the past, what we can try and match a prior case up to yours for similarities, and what we can try and get as a feasible sentence length, and the one, because they were going off in our case, you know, it just happened to be that this teenager at the time had stabbed this old granddad or something, and you know, they'd given her, I think it was her, given her like 14 years, and that's where they got that comparable sort of sentence length for us. And I just thought, I understand that, but like if you'd have gone for like 16 years, then maybe we would have got more, you know. But and then that's the other thing, like I suppose I just, as time's gone on, I just felt that sentence length has been a value of Emma's life. And for then someone to say, you know, go to the Court of Appeal and they were like, oh, well, we think, you know, Judge Sullivan was wrong, didn't say this or didn't say that, or wasn't, you know, correct in what he was saying, so we're going to reduce that down to 60%. To me, it's like, you're saying you're devaluing Emma's life. Is that what you're saying? That you're this person there that's grown these two children and was a wife, a mother, and is now like worth another 18 months less on her life, you know, because that's how I perceive that really. And yeah, and that's what I found pretty challenging. But then I do understand though that even if we'd have got life, you know, in that term, they just said, okay, well, we're going to give you life. Like, yeah, for a day, I think you'd have felt validated, but I think the day after that, you'd have been like, yeah, but she's still dead. She's never going to come back, you know. So thanks for that. You know, that's the part about it. I think whatever sentence length you get, there comes a point when you realise that they're never coming back. And whether they get 14 years, 16 years or 30 years, like, they're never coming back. It's not going to make any bit of difference, you know. So, and I think I've just had to accept what the courts are doing and sentence length and the justice system, because I just think, and I do think that like I have helped in some regard, and because I know initially the DPP was reluctant to go for a heinous crime, and I think, I'm not saying it was solely on me, but me being vocal to them and trying to push a bit, was that they were like, oh, okay, we'll go for heinous crime, and you know, we've got some other cases we can reference that against. And then again, when it got reduced down to 60%, like I'm not saying that I was solely, you know, to help for this, but again, speaking to the Premier on the phone and sort of the Attorney General, and you know, almost sobbing and being angrily shouting down the phone to them, then I think may have like helped. But I'm sure that because of the political statement or, you know, scenario we're in, you know, it was at no loss to the government to try and appeal the sentence, that, you know. So, but yeah,
you describe it all so well in what is a horrendous situation. You mentioned justice in there, and there has been so many ebbs and flows to this case, but seeing justice for Emma, what does justice mean to you now?
I suppose I wanted, you know, like a decent, you know, like prison length. And I think like if I would, like on the first day, like they would have said, okay, we've given you like 18 years. I think I would have walked out of court and said, I'm fine with that, you know, but just to go to like 14 and then only get like 70%. And this is what I just don't agree with. Like, I don't understand why it's like a system where like someone's automatically only has to do 70% or 60 or whatever the judge gives them. I don't understand why it's not like, okay, well, we'll give you 70%. But at that point, like, you know, say for a youth offender for R1, like if say you've finished grade 12, you've done other courses, you show remorse, you're trying to be a good person or whatever, then we'll let you out at 70%. But if not, you haven't completed grade 12, you haven't done this, you haven't done that, then you've got to do 14 years. You know, I don't understand why it's automatically 70%. And that's where I don't think justice is really being like served, because there's no incentive for that person to try and reform himself.
Yeah.
He doesn't have to do anything. He could just, you know, ride his time out and come out and leave probably a more knowledgeable person by talking to other, you know, convicts inside or whatever. Like, where's the incentive for someone to be a better person, you know? Like,
is there a point that you will get to or have reached where you are going to need to draw a line in the sand and kind of refocus?
Well, I think we're almost at that, you know, because a couple of weeks ago I was the High Court of Australia for the appeal of the appeal. So it was the Attorney General appealing the Queensland Supreme Court appeal. And I didn't realise this, but like, you know, there hasn't been one granted like in over 20 years. So, you know, you like for an Attorney General, you know, to appeal something, she's got to think that's wrong to start with, whatever that is. That's after the Supreme Court appeal has been handed out, because, you know, she just might go with that, or whoever the Attorney General is might think, well, the appeal is done, that's it. But for them to say, well, no, we think they're wrong, is one thing. But then my understanding is they then have to like lodge an appeal, or like, was it like apply for leave or something they call it? But a lot of the
Yes.
time, you know, a lot of the time High Court will be like, no, we don't think that's warranted or whatever. But for her to like, them to say like, yeah, you can apply, and then to be actually go to court and be heard, I think is a positive for us. But I know now that like when we get the result, which might be within the next sort of couple of months, that's as much as we can do. The High Court of Australia is the highest court in Australia, and it ain't going any further. So, you know, on worst case that they say, look, no, that's the 60% stands, well then I just have to accept that, you know. But if they're like, well, no, we're going to overrule the High Court of Queensland and we're going to install the 70%, then it's a bonus and a win for us, that, you know. So, but then that will be it. That for me will be done, and I just got to then sort of focus on, I suppose maybe my grief journey a bit more, really, because you know, it's 3.5 years for me now, and I suppose I'm finding that this third year has been probably challenging than the ones before. I think that's what I said to you before about just being like in a state of shock, I suppose, you know, or and just not really fully grieving. And then, but yeah, just this year has been well, quite tough. Like, it was Emma's birthday back in February, and you know, other years it hasn't, I wouldn't say it hasn't affected me, but like this year it was like a week or so beforehand, I was like just feeling so down, you know, and even on the day was just pretty tough, and you know, dealing with that. And
Yeah.
well, I don't know what you're like, I don't know what other widows are like, but at times I found that like music has been like so helpful to me to get in that space, you know, to feel sad, I suppose, you know. And I found it easier to get there when I'm tired as well. But like the past couple of weeks I've just been trying to put that grief behind a door for now. I just don't want to deal with that at the moment. So just trying to be a little more happier at the moment. So I'm just trying to do whatever I can mentally. I'm saying to put that grief behind a door, and I'll deal with that when I want to at a later date. But I can just feel it like knocking at that door, wanting to come back out. And, you know, that's the best way I can describe it. And yeah, but I don't want to deal with it really. So
It has a tendency to to let you know that it's there, and it'll be there for you when you're ready. And I think that that's part of this, is that everybody's experience is so different, and you know, it's also about, you know, you mentioned before, almost allowing it to come in for a bit and then putting it away again, and then allowing a little bit more and then putting it away again, and just managing it how you can. Can I ask you, just off the back of that, what kind of things, if any, have you managed to do for yourself in caring for your emotional and your mental health while going through all of this?
I suppose I've needed like structure and routine has been like a big one for me. Like, I went back to work 6 weeks after Emma died, because my work only paid for like a month compassionate leave, and then I was going into my like sick leave, and I didn't really want to be using too much. So, but in some ways I just think that was like better for me to like go back to work and like to take my mind off it a bit, you know. And but yeah, just having a structure, I suppose, like coming home from work, you know, knowing what I've needed to cook for dinner, cooking dinner, making sure the kids are sorted out, and, you know, because they've had like dancing and tutoring on different times, and used to use like a calendar on the fridge and writing specific times down and doing this sort of stuff, but then also getting out with them at the weekends. And still taking them to beaches and, walking around markets and trying to give them as much as their normal life as I could has helped, I suppose, and just almost trying to have some sort of normality to our lives as well. And I suppose also trying to feel safer in my home as well. I was very lucky that within a couple of days, even though it was Christmas, I got an affiliate of CrimSafe come around and put a screen door on the front of our house, and I've had extra security lights put out the front so the house lights up like a Christmas tree if anyone comes near it, and just that sort of stuff has helped a bit really. But yeah.
A range of things, clearly. And I know that you have a long way to go, which is completely understandable. I suspect you're not looking too far ahead and really at the moment just still putting one foot in front of the other. Would that be right?
Look, it sounds funny, but I'm not really looking forward to the future at the moment. The first year after Emma had gone, I said to the kids that we wouldn't be here for Christmas. So, I was focused on getting my annual leave up and getting some savings to go back to the UK. And then it was weird because the next year, my brother, came over for Christmas with us, but I didn't really felt like I had anything to look forward to, and I'm not necessarily saying that I needed to. I think that's something I needed to try and get my head around as well. But I suppose I just felt that first year, I knew that I had a holiday planned and I had something to work to for that year, and that was what it was getting to the point of. But then I suppose this year, I don't know, I'm not really looking forward at the moment. Yeah, maybe just sort of, I don't know, just taking each day as it comes, I suppose, and just sort of getting through each week, and we'll figure life out as it comes along, I suppose.
Yeah. I think that sounds perfectly perfect, actually, until such time as you can take on a bit more. And it sounds like you are very close with your daughters. How are they managing?
Going pretty well. They've had sort of monthly counselling ever since, and I know very early on, my eldest daughter and I would sort of talk about the events of that evening. I don't know why really, just trying to understand it, I suppose, but then one day my youngest daughter was like, I know you two like talking about it, but I don't. I was like, okay. So I suppose we didn't bring it up after that. And I just said to her one day, look, if there's anything you want to know about, then just talk, or you want to talk about anything, just let me know, and but I won't talk about it again. I won't bring it up on it, and they're both going pretty well. My eldest daughter really struggled with grade 11, and which in turn made me struggle, I suppose, just, because she had some issues with friend groups or whatever. And, I remember it was one day I was driving around sort of Noosa area, and I'm getting 20 messages on WhatsApp from her saying how much she hated school and didn't want to be there and all this sort of jazz, and so then I had to get onto the guidance counsellor and sort of say, can you go and get her? She's not having a good time, and got her out of class. And but then grade 12 settled down a bit for her. And my youngest daughter has done a lot of dancing, like I said earlier. I just think that having that and has really kept her focused. And she's got 3 or 4 friends as a group that's core friends. I think that have just been there for her, and vice versa. And I think again that's sort of worked out well for her. And they've both got boyfriends now, and they just seem to be getting on with life. And I don't suppose any of us really wants us to keep drudging up the past and being down. But we still talk about Emma, and in different ways, and memories about her, and days we've had out, and things around the house, and that sort of stuff. So yeah.
It does sound like your daughters are finding, I guess, their path. For you, what brings you joy at the moment? Maybe just the smallest of things even.
I've said this for a number of years, but just spending time with my kids actually is probably my number one thing. Just having them as my daughters, but as my friends as well, and wanting to do stuff with me, for going out to the beach and, days out and all that sort of stuff, and actually them wanting to come along with their boyfriends and spend the day. Because, yeah, I think that's it's just for me, having a relationship with them and just having this closeness. I don't think anything can beat that, really. Yeah.
That's beautiful. Lee, if you could speak to another widowed person who might be navigating loss under difficult circumstances, not necessarily exactly what you've gone through, but something that is fairly challenging, what would you want them to know?
I think, like most people would say, like, it will get easier. In those early days, early weeks, early months, it's just so tough. Like, there's times when you'll be at home on a Saturday night and you'll be by yourself, and yeah, it can be very, very lonely, but you'll get there, like just one day at a time. And yeah, I don't know, just that it will get easier as much as that's hard to comprehend. But yeah, I think that's probably the best piece of advice I think I can offer, really. So yeah.
And is there anything that you've learnt, I'm sure a lot, but that you can think of around strength or resilience that you didn't know before this happened? So, something in yourself, something in the girls, something in you as a family?
Yeah, so I've had to deal with like a lot of things, like bringing up the kids and dealing with finances and the home and mortgages, and making sure the kids have got clothes, clean clothes, and they eat well and that sort of stuff, And I even like going to like court as well and that sort of stuff. Like, I just felt that like I've needed to do this like for myself, to be like, to prove to myself and to Emma, I suppose, that like I am a strong person and like I can do this. Because it would have been so easy, one to have, say, like, got the kids off to bed, to school, and then gone back to bed, or not gone to work, or just got takeaway 7 nights a week, or, when I've gone to court, let other people speak for me, but I didn't want that. Like, I wanted to prove to myself that like I am a strong person, like mentally, I can do this. And, sometimes it's been tough and exhausting, so exhausting, but I just needed to prove to myself, like I said, and in some weird way to like Emma, that like, like I'm a good husband and I'm a good father, and yeah, so.
I'm sure that she would agree, without a doubt. What do you like to do to remember Emma?
I just like to be able to talk about her, in all ways, like in funny ways and in sad ways, and just to keep her memory alive in that way of talking about her, and not feeling that she needs to be like hidden away, like we can't talk about her name, like, because it's too upsetting, because that's not the case, like, yeah, like one occasion was horrific and awful, but there was also all those other years of like beauty and love and laughter, and I just want to try and remember her that way, so yeah.
Yeah. Off the back of that, I'd like to actually ask you what you'd want other people to remember about Emma beyond the headlines, because this all has become so public.
She was actually like a really like quiet, shy person, and would just like hate being in the public eye. If roles were reversed, I'm not too sure she would have taken this on as much as I have, and I just don't think she would want to deal with that and be put in front of cameras like that, and yeah, she was always just quite happy with her family, and to have a cocktail on a Saturday night and fall asleep in front of the TV, yeah.
You aren't looking too far ahead, and that's completely understandable. But when you sort of dared to look a little bit ahead, whether it's a few days or a week, what gives you hope?
I don't know. That's a tough question, that really. Just maybe knowing, I suppose, that there are happier times to come, and this won't necessarily define the girls and I, Yeah, your future is what you make of it, I suppose. So you can either let a situation like drown you, or you can sort of come out the other side like a stronger person, I suppose.
Very poignant words, Lee. Thank you so much for your honesty and your openness, and for letting us into your life and Emma's life and the girls. It's been an absolute delight to talk to you, and wish you everything and more for the future.
Okay, thank you for that.
Thank you to all my guests for sharing their stories so generously. The Widow Diaries is hosted and produced by me, Caroline Winter, from Pod Talk for First Light Widowed Support, which provides information, resources and connection for young widowed people throughout Australia. Follow or subscribe to the podcast so you don't miss an episode, and you can also find out more information at firstlight.org.au. This podcast acknowledges and celebrates the traditional custodians of the land and waters on which stories have been told for thousands of years, and on which this podcast is recorded.